on what he's been hearing us talk about, and to also talk about this James O'Keefe interview that he got. James O'Keefe is in the national news every week. He helped bring down Acorn, and he's just one guy that knows about the hypocrisy, will go out and do real investigative journalism, and he gets calls by Nightline, you name it, saying, we wish we could do what you're doing. We want to have the freedom. It brings ratings, it does the right thing, but they want to kill journalism. See, by government controlling journalism and making dinosaur media kill itself, it's the beginning of the end of journalism to begin with. That's why we're trying to bring it back. They don't imagine that grassroots people could try to build a news organization or an analysis organization on their own. Jakari Jackson, your take on that?
That's exactly right, Alex, and I want to talk about some of our new election coverage coming out here. Let's go ahead and talk about the governor's race now. We know that the governor's race here in Texas has gotten a lot of national attention. Even the likes of Michelle Obama coming out and openly endorsing one Wendy Davis. That's where the guys were out. Well, not at the Wendy Davis campaign, but at the Greg Abbott campaign. And right now we see that Greg Abbott, the Republican, is ahead with 60%, Wendy Davis at about 40%. And it's not a left-right issue. It's not that Republicans are all good and Democrats are all bad. You know, we also look at other people such as libertarians, other affiliations as well. But that's what the big one here in Texas is. And what do you guys think about this this race so far in the state of Texas? You know, do you think we'd be better off with a Greg Abbott as opposed to a Wendy Davis?
Well, look, we're for whoever the underdog is, whoever the people are voting for as a repudiation of what the establishment's been doing. We know they control both parties to a great extent. But clearly, I would think that Abbott is much better than Wendy Davis, who says she wants our guns, hasn't seen a kid she didn't wish was aborted, and is just a nasty, horrible person trying to bring in illegals to leverage and take over the election. Leanne McAdoo, your take on Wendy, I love to kill babies, Davis.
Well, for myself personally, I think it's just really insulting that they only tell women to just vote with their vaginas, as if that's the only thing that matters to this country.
That's the name of this piece on YouTube. Don't vote with your...
Hoo-ha. It really bothers me. I think it's just so offensive. There's so many other really pressing issues that are out there, and that's the thing with me. That's what Wendy Davis, you know, rose to stardom with that. But I just, you know, what else have you got? What else are you going to do for...
Well, sure. I mean, that goes back to Hillary. Vote for her just because she's a woman?
Right.
I'm curious, Jakari, what's going on in the Florida race? Because there you've got a Republican governor running against a former Republican governor who is now a Democrat, and the two of them have flip-flopped on issues so many times. I mean, they're just interchangeable with each other. And there's a libertarian there that we interviewed last week who was pulling around 10% in the polls. Some polls had him a little bit higher. Have they reported anything on that race?
Yes, it's not a hard decision yet, but we see the Republican Scott, the incumbent, with 48%, and then Chris, the Democrat, with 46%. And then after that, we have Wiley, 3%, Burkett, 0.7%, and Kavari, that is 0.4%.
Interesting. Okay. Still a pretty good show for a third-party candidate who doesn't even get allowed in the debates.
Right. Well, they moved the goalposts.
100%. Homestead exemption. Why should I even own a house now when the property taxes are so fabulous?
Yeah.
My dad bought 4 acres and a house for $140,000 20 years ago. The city now values it at a couple $1 million. My dad can't, even though it's homesteaded, it goes up 10% each year.
Yeah.
And my dad can't even hardly keep his house.
Yeah.
He doesn't own it. It's a rent.
Yeah.
So I might as well just go rent an apartment somewhere.
Yes.
I mean, they do not want you owing jack crap, and that, again, is enslavement. That's what Mordor on the Potomac wants.
Especially your home, and that was an issue that the Libertarian brought to the forefront there, offering people a 100% homestead exemption. I think that's a great idea. That needs to be...
Oh.
Yes.
Government housing, you don't have a Second Amendment right or a right to privacy. They come in and search you.
Right.
Now apartments are doing it. See, that's why they don't want you having your own property, because you might get the idea that you're a separate person and not a cog in their machine.
Right.
It's just like the transportation issue. For the longest time, they've wanted to have light rail, they've wanted to have buses because they want to control your transportation. Now they're going to be able to do that with computer-driven, government-controlled cars. That's the way that they're going to control the grid there. Jakari, what's going on in North Carolina? Still curious about that because the polls yesterday were predicting that Kay Hagan was going to going to win that. And now early results were showing the Republican there. And although he is very much an establishment Republican, let me make that clear. If they hadn't torpedoed the Tea Party candidate in the Republican primaries, I think it wouldn't have been that close.
Yeah, at this point, Politico doesn't have any hard numbers for North Carolina. They do have South Carolina in the governor's race. Haley, the incumbent, is, they say they clinched it at 60%. So still waiting those numbers in North Carolina. Some of the other hard numbers.
Those nukes are missing, Alex.
Those nukes are still missing. The Ohio governor, is it Kasich? Kasich is in the lead with 62%. Politico says they've clinched it. Also in Tennessee, we have Haslam with 69%. They say they got that. And also in Alabama, we see Bentley with 70%. They say they have that as well. The other states are still grayed out or in the process of counting the votes.
All right, we're going to have a lot more on this later, obviously, as we go towards midnight and the results pretty much come in. But, Jakari, tell us about this James O'Keefe piece, Project Veritas, and give us your take overall on this organization. Because I don't care whether you're a libertarian, a conservative, a Democrat, a Tory, whatever country you're in, this is real journalism. I mean, he just continues to have a huge effect doing simple, basic investigations and showing people with stunts what's really happening.
Or they just reveal their own lies. He just lets them talk.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like O'Keefe. You know, I've had a chance to interview him a few times. And every time I talk to him, you know, I always ask him what's next. He never wants to tell me, and for good reason, because he's so controversial. You know, in the report I had a chance to do with him the other day, one of the first things the lady says to him when he walks in, she says, "You look like James O'Keefe." So that tells you how big of an impact that he's having, that people who may not even be a regular follower of his will recognize him on the street. He's like, who's James O'Keefe? You know, so it's a good deal. And I'm real happy to see O'Keefe out there doing many things that he does, you know, whether it's crossing the border, you know, dressed up as Osama bin Laden, the things he did with Project Acorn, and now currently exposing the voter fraud, whether that's in North Carolina, some of the shenanigans here in the state of Texas with Battleground Texas, many other things that he's done as well. I think he's, you know, on the front line of investigative journalism. And sometimes it does put him in some hot water. You know, he's been involved in some lawsuits and things like that. And I had a chance to ask him off camera. I said, you know, do you expect any further lawsuits coming in the future? He says, you know, it's inevitable. But that's what happens when you're out there on the front lines of journalism, going at it 100%. You know, you get involved in those situations. And hopefully that, you know, he can beat the rap and beat the ride if he ever encounters a situation like that again. But yeah, James, he has some great things to say, not only about his recent undercover investigations in North Carolina, but also touched on the Eric Holder situation. You guys remember he was offered the ballot for Eric Holder, the Attorney General, which is to say that, you know, a public figure, you know, somebody who's very much in the public light, saying that he wants to ban guns, brainwash people about guns, somebody who's so influential in his circle of influence. You know, if he can be offered somebody else's ballot, what's to say about Joe Blow down the street, or, you know, Bob Brown? You know, who's to say that he couldn't get those ballots just as easily? But it's a good report. Everybody should watch it, and it's coming up next.
That's right, Jakari. And, you know, looking at all of this corruption, this is a system that's not been held accountable. So if somebody like James O'Keefe or INFOWARS just can go out and change the world, what could other people do? And it shows how controlled the corporate media is, that they just follow in lockstep. So let's go ahead and go to this report. Then we're going to come back and look at GMO labeling with Anthony Gucciardi, Rob Dew, and others. We also have a Greg Palast interview that Darren McBreen's done. We're going to look at illegal voting and the latest on that, election fraud, the Attorney General going after Texas. We're going to talk to Joe Biggs, and we're also going to look at the best of O'Keefe with Obama. We're also going to look at transcending the system with David Knight. We got Gerald Celente coming up. We're going to have election results on the Texas gubernatorial race being watched so closely with Abbott. And, of course, Wendy, I Love to Kill Babies, Davis. That's all coming up tonight. So here's Jakari Jackson talking to James O'Keefe.
And welcome to InfoWars continuing coverage. Our topic of the hour, voter fraud. How easy is it to do? It is, in fact, quite easy, as our next guest will demonstrate, James O'Keefe. All right, it's good to see you again, James. The last time we talked to you were doing some reporting about the shenanigans going on in the state of Texas. Now it's my understanding that you've been out to some other areas as well. And I will say that the recent reporting you did is some of my favorite, because we've seen you play a pimp. It's probably the first time I was introduced to you. Then you played Osama bin Laden. Now, my favorite role is you playing a guy who looks like James O'Keefe. The lady in the video, she says, hey, you look like that guy James O'Keefe. And you say, I've never heard of this guy. Let's go to this clip, and then we'll get your comment about it.
Thank you. Who'd you say I look like?
You look like James O'Keefe.
Oh, that. I don't know who that is.
You need to find out.
I will.
I would say
Thank you. My twin?
Okay, James, so tell us where you are, what was going on, and what led you to this particular report.
We're in the area surrounding Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, and we walked into these poll precinct locations and simply said the names of inactive voters, and they told us, they offered us ballots. We did this a total of about 20 times, and everyone offered us a ballot except one, and that person asked to see my driver's license, which is against the rules. You're not allowed to ask for ID, but when they did ask for ID, I was unable to get a ballot. I was unable to get someone else's ballot. So we demonstrated that in-person voter fraud is possible. This comes on the heels of a report we did last week where a worker was fired, a campaign worker was fired for telling us to vote for non-citizens. And this comes 2 weeks after in Colorado, a worker was fired for telling us to go dumpster diving for ballots of African Americans to vote in their names. So we really have done a big series on voter fraud, and it's having an impact on these races.
Yeah, because they keep saying that, voter fraud, it can't happen. It's a foolproof system, or nigh foolproof, should I say. But, you demonstrated perfectly. You can go vote as people who are even deceased. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, anyone whose name is on the rolls, you could walk right up to the poll location, state their name, state their address, and you can get offered their ballot. You just have to sign the form. We didn't actually sign any forms because that would be a felony, but it is possible. There's 700,000 inactive voters. There's over 1,000 people in North Carolina who are registered to vote who are non-citizens. So this stuff is entirely possible, and the elections are so close, it could make a difference.
And when we talk about this voter fraud, it doesn't even have to be somebody who's necessarily not going to vote. Could it just be a circumstance where you get to the polls before they do?
Very, very well could be, and many people don't vote. In Colorado, in the mail-in ballots, almost half or 1/3 of those ballots are thrown away or discarded. And one of the officials in the video says, yeah, you should go fill those ballots out, fill in those mail-in ballots. All you got to do is check mark someone's name and forge their signature, and and congratulations, you're voting on somebody else's name. So it's possible. The Board of Elections is now investigating. It's really a simple ruse. We've done it before. We got offered Eric Holder's ballot 2 years ago. We went into Eric Holder's precinct and walked right up to the Attorney General where he votes, and the poll worker said, here you go, Mr. Holder. And of course, we weren't Eric Holder, but they assumed we were because there's no photo ID. And then after we did this, they actually had a picture of Eric Holder put on his poll location.
Are you serious?
So they instituted, they verified identity for Eric Holder, but nobody else.
Yeah, I remember that one. You guys were like, I'll be back faster than you could say furious. But, it just shows how easy this thing is to manipulate. And people would say, they try to criticize it. Well, you're showing people how to illegally vote. These people already know if they want to participate in these actions, how to do it. Because you don't, in the jurisdictions you're going to, you don't need a voter ID like you do here in the state of Texas. So let me ask you this. At any point, what surprised you the most? Was there a situation you said, well, no, we're not going to get away with it this time, or just something happened that you didn't expect to happen at all?
Well, the shock was, there's a couple of funny anecdotes. One time I was doing this in one of the areas, and I believe it was Durham or Cary, North Carolina, and I was standing right in front of a sheriff or a police officer, and he stood there right behind me as I was doing this ruse. Of course, I wasn't breaking any laws, but there's always the presumption they arrest you and ask questions later. And the police officer had his hands on the side of his body, and it looked like, I basically said to myself, I'm pretty much screwed. He's going to arrest me the moment I turn around. So I turn around, and I get offered this ballot, and I say, well, let me go out to the car, and I'll be back. That was my excuse for getting out of the location. And the officer looks at me, and I'm expecting him to put handcuffs. He literally just walked right by me and said, he just said, hey, he was voting. I thought he was there to, stop me from doing this ruse, but he was just there as a police officer voting. There was another anecdote where the woman in the video actually does say, "I need to see your driver's license," and I did not expect that. That was the one thing I did not